There's a specific kind of silence that comes right before your entire world falls apart. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's eerily soft, like the moment before a storm rips the roof off your house. That silence was the only thing I heard the morning my husband and two grown children left me standing alone on our porch, suitcase in hand, eyes wide, heart in my throat. And it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was a choice. Their choice. For over 12 years, I had been the shadow in that house, the invisible hand that held it all together, the one who changed the linens, bathed my mother-in-law, managed her medications, turned her body every 2 hours through the night so she wouldn't develop bed sores. I was the one who missed holidays, skipped birthdays, and gave up vacations. Not because I didn't want joy, but because someone had to stay behind. Someone had to make sure Lillian, Frank's bedridden, stern, disapproving mother, stayed alive. I gave up everything for her, for them. And when she finally passed away, I cried, not only from grief, but from the sheer overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, my life could start again. I remember standing at her bedside, clutching her cold hand, whispering, "Rest now." But deep down, it was a message to myself. Rest now. Margaret, you've done enough. That week, Frank seemed distant but calm. He didn't talk much. He spent most of his time in the garage or tapping away at his phone in our bedroom. But when he walked into the kitchen on Thursday morning and said, "How about a family trip? Just the four of us." Something in my chest fluttered. "Really?" I said. "Where to?" "Yellowstone. Just a few days. We could all use the break." I hadn't left Savannah, Georgia, in over a decade. The last time I traveled was for a funeral. So the idea of a vacation? With my family? I threw myself into planning like a woman possessed. I bought travel-size shampoos. I packed the snacks they liked. I dug through old photo albums to find the map we used on our honeymoon. I even made Aaron's favorite granola bars from scratch, the ones with extra cinnamon and a little sea salt. I thought, no, I believed this trip would be the reset we needed. I was wrong. The morning we were supposed to leave, I woke up before dawn. I folded our clothes, packed the last cooler, and stood by the door with a soft smile as Frank and the kids loaded the car. I was nervous but hopeful. Frank glanced at his phone, then turned towards me. "There's no room," he said. My hands were still holding a sweater I had planned to wear on the flight. "What?" "There's no room in the car," he repeated. "You can come next time." Just like that. No emotion, no apology, just cold, mechanical words. I looked at Caleb, my son, my boy who used to cry when I left him at kindergarten. "Mom," he shrugged, "it's a long drive. Your back's going to ache the whole way and you'll just complain." Erin didn't even look at me. She brushed past, hopped in the back seat, and started scrolling on her phone. I waited for Frank to say something kind, something fatherly, husbandly, anything. But he just gave me a tight-lipped nod, closed the door, and drove away. I stood on the porch for nearly 10 minutes, unable to move. The morning sun was rising, casting a golden hue over our cul-de-sac. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor's dog barked. The world carried on like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. It wasn't just about the trip. It was the realization that I had become expendable, a prop in the story of their lives, the one who served, the one who stayed behind, the one who didn't get invited. When I finally walked back inside the house, it felt foreign, like I didn't belong there. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down on the edge of the bed, and stared into the nothingness. Then my phone buzzed. A message from a friend. "Didn't know you were in Yellowstone. Great pic of Frank and the kids." Attached was a screenshot from Frank's Facebook account. In the photo, Frank stood smiling beside Caleb and Aaron, and next to him, her hand gently brushing his arm, was Charlene. Charlene. The name alone made my skin tighten. She'd been a high school friend of Frank's. They'd reconnected online years ago, just catching up, he'd said. Harmless. But there she was now, tucked between my family like she belonged there. I clicked on her profile. She had tagged them in multiple posts over the last few months. A wine tasting in Napa, a hiking trip in Asheville, a Broadway show in New York. I hadn't seen any of those posts before. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't included. I was blocked. Frank had been traveling with her, with my children, while I was scrubbing his mother's bedpans, washing soiled clothes, and making home-cooked meals no one remembered to thank me for. That was when something cracked open inside me. A dam I didn't know I had built. Rage, humiliation, heartbreak. They all came flooding through. 2 years ago on Thanksgiving, I had asked for a simple family photo, just the four of us on the couch. Too much hassle, they said. Nobody does cheesy family portraits anymore. Frank had laughed. We'll do it next time. There was no next time, and yet there they were, smiling wide, huddled around Charlene, taking all those cheesy photos I had begged for. I stood up. I walked to the hallway mirror and stared at my reflection. My hair was graying. My eyes were sunken. My skin was dry. I looked like someone who had been erased by her own family. Year by year, I had become invisible in my own home. But that day, standing alone in that house, I made a quiet promise to myself. They may have erased me from their trip. They may have edited me out of their memories. But I would no longer erase myself from my own story. They had taken the first step in walking away. Now, it was my turn. Before we dive into what happened next, if this story has moved you even a little, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us keep telling stories that matter. Every like, every subscription, it keeps us going. And now, let me ask you something. If you were in Margaret's shoes, alone, betrayed, and forgotten, what would you do next? Would you A. Wait for them to come back and explain themselves? B. Walk away and start a new chapter, even if it means walking alone? Comment below with A or B and let us know your choice. Let's continue, because what I did next didn't just surprise them. It shocked everyone, even me. The first time someone told me I was too much, I was 15. I'd won a statewide essay competition, beat out kids from wealthy private schools, the kind who'd spent their summers in Europe and spoke 3 languages. I remember the look on my teacher's face when she handed me the medal. "You're going to go far, Margaret," she said, eyes shining with pride. Back then, I believed her. In my small North Carolina town, ambition in a girl wasn't always celebrated. It was tolerated. If she kept her mouth shut, I didn't. I was the kind of girl who challenged teachers, led the debate team, and volunteered to organize community fundraisers. I had a scholarship to Duke University, a full ride, the kind of opportunity no one else in my family had ever touched. And then I met Frank Whitman. He was 2 years older, home from college during the summer. He had a way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He'd lean in slightly, ask questions like they mattered, and quote philosophers I'd only read in textbooks. He was from my town too, but different, ambitious, like me. Except he wasn't told he was too much. He was told he was going places. Frank chased me. He didn't care about the whispers that started circulating after a group of local boys followed me home one night. I'd stood up for myself, fought back with a baseball bat. The police cleared me. But in a town like ours, justice didn't travel as fast as rumors. What was she doing out so late? Did she lead them on? Too aggressive? Too bold? Frank, though, didn't flinch. He sat across from me in the town cafe, slipped a folded note into my hand, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This girl is the smartest woman I've ever met." I was 18. That one sentence felt like a lifeline, maybe even a rescue. He left for school again, but we wrote letters every week. Real ones. Ink-stained, tear-marked, with lipstick kisses on the seal. When he asked me to marry him the following summer, I said yes without hesitation. I turned down Duke, told myself love was a different kind of education. For a while, it was beautiful. We lived in a tiny apartment in Atlanta while Frank studied law. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing by day, taking seamstress work by night, just to pay our rent and send him to class in iron shirts and polished shoes. I stitched my dreams into every hem, every button, every packed lunch. When I got pregnant with Caleb, we moved back to Savannah. Frank had accepted a junior associate position. Aaron came 2 years later, and we bought the house on Azalea Street. Modest, warm, the kind of place where I imagined we'd grow old together. And then Lillian moved in. Frank's mother had slipped on the back steps of her house and broken her hip. He said it would be temporary, just until she recovers. I believed him. I always did. Her recovery never came. Instead, there were more diagnoses, heart issues, diabetes, and then the stroke that took her speech. The woman who once ruled Sunday dinners with judgmental precision became still and silent, and I, already raising 2 toddlers, became her full-time caregiver. No one asked me. There was no conversation, just the assumption that I would do it. Because I was the wife, because I didn't have a real job, because I was so good with people. What choice did I have? Every morning I woke up before the kids, checked Lillian's oxygen machine, prepared her meals, bathed her, massaged her legs, changed her. I learned how to lift her without hurting her back. I kept her skin from breaking down. She never developed a single bed sore, not one. That wasn't luck. That was me. Frank called me his angel in public. At church, he'd smile and say, "Margaret keeps the whole house running. I couldn't do it without her." But at home, he was absent, tired, distant. He'd retreat into his study after dinner, nursing a glass of whiskey and scrolling through his phone. He used to touch my hand under the table. Now he barely looked up when I walked into a room. Our children grew. So did the responsibilities. Caleb needed help with college applications. Aaron had anxiety attacks before math tests. I was there for every meltdown, every fever, every scraped knee and broken heart. I was the constant, the safe place. The one who stayed. And they loved me. Once, I think. But something happens when you serve quietly for too long. People forget that service is a choice. They start believing it's a given. The gifts Frank brought home from business trips grew fewer and cheaper. A beaded necklace, a hotel soap. Once, he handed me a scarf with a proud grin and said, "It's a local brand." It had no tag, probably a souvenir shop purchase made 10 minutes before his flight. I told myself it didn't matter, that he was just busy, that we were just tired. But then I started noticing things. He was gone more often. His phone was always on silent. He began quoting someone named Char in conversations. "Char says this book's overrated. Char recommended this hotel." I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Then came the Instagram photo I was never supposed to see. Frank, Caleb, Aaron, and Charlene in Napa Valley, laughing over wine. The same trip where I'd been home, feeding Lillian with a spoon while the dog barked for dinner and the sink overflowed with dishes. That moment opened a vault inside me. All the late nights I spent sewing so Frank wouldn't look like a poor kid at college. All the meals I skipped so the kids could have seconds. All the dreams I buried because someone else's needs were louder than mine. I wasn't just tired. I was erased. And the thing is, I hadn't always been this woman. The tired housewife, the invisible caretaker. Once, I was fire. Once, I could command a room with my voice, win awards, write speeches that made grown men weep. What happened to her? Where did she go? Frank didn't steal her from me. Not entirely. Neither did Lillian. I gave her away bit by bit every time I said yes to someone else and no to myself. I gave her away when I packed away my Duke acceptance letter and pretended I didn't cry. I gave her away when I stopped writing. When I stopped reading. When I stopped dancing in the kitchen. When I started measuring my worth in casseroles baked and shirts ironed and pills administered on time. But grief is funny. It doesn't just show up when someone dies. Sometimes it arrives when you realize the life you dreamed of is gone and nobody even noticed. That night, I took out an old wooden box from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were remnants of the girl I used to be, a medal from that statewide essay competition, a dry corsage from my high school dance, a postcard from Duke's Welcome Week that I never attended. I held them in my hands and wept, not for Frank, not for Lillian, for me, because I had been good, I had been kind, I had done everything right, and it hadn't saved me. It had only made it easier for them to forget I was ever there, but not anymore, because the woman I used to be, she wasn't gone. She was waiting, and she was done being quiet. It started with a sound I had become all too familiar with, my phone buzzing on the counter, always urgent when someone wanted something from me, never when someone wanted to ask how I was. I glanced at the screen, a text from Caleb. Mom, the new desktop is being delivered today. Please move it into my room when it arrives. Be careful, it's expensive. No greeting, no concern. No acknowledgement of what had happened days before, when he and the rest of the family drove off with Charlene like I didn't exist. Just a cold, transactional instruction, as if I were an employee, or worse, a servant. I stared at that message for a long moment, then turned off the phone. I didn't reply. I didn't even sigh. Instead, I walked into Frank's study, a room I had spent years keeping tidy, dusting his shelves, wiping the smudges from his glass-covered books, polishing the leather on his reading chair. This room had been his retreat from the chaos of life. And somehow, I had been tasked with ensuring his retreat remained sacred, even as my world crumbled. The study looked just as it had for decades, organized, impressive, curated with taste. The collection of rare, signed books, first editions, handwritten notes, and academic journals he had marked with reverence. These books were more than paper and ink to him. They were his pride, his legacy, the proof that he was a man of substance. But suddenly, I didn't see knowledge or value on those shelves. I saw neglect. I saw how much effort I had poured into preserving his sanctuary while my soul shriveled in silence. And I realized something. These books didn't matter to me. He didn't matter to me. Not anymore. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply moved with purpose. I walked into the garage, found the largest suitcase we owned, the one we used on the rare vacations we took when the kids were small, and I wheeled it into the study. I pulled volume after volume from the shelves, carefully, calmly. The ones he cherished most went in first. The signed copy of the Brothers Karamazov, the limited edition collection of Churchill's wartime memoirs, his annotated copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the journals he had scrawled in late at night when he fancied himself a philosopher. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it shut, pulled on a jacket, and walked out the door. I hadn't spoken to Laura in years. We'd gone to high school together, shared lunch during senior year, and parted ways when life pulled us in different directions. But I knew she worked at the Veterans Library in downtown Savannah, a quiet, dusty place filled with old maps, military history, and volunteers who treated books with the kind of reverence Frank demanded from everyone around him. When I walked through the door with the suitcase, Laura looked up in shock. "Margaret," she said, "what? What's all this?" I opened the case slowly and gestured toward the contents. "Frank's collection," I said. "It's yours now. For the library. For anyone who might actually appreciate them." She blinked. "Are you sure? These are incredible. Some of these are worth thousands. Why are you giving them away?" "Because," I said, my voice steady, "he already gave me away. Years ago. He just forgot to tell me." She didn't ask another question. She didn't need to. The truth was written all over my face. That kind of pain doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. She nodded slowly, gently closed the suitcase, and promised she'd find them a good home. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different, lighter. There was still a weight in my chest, but it had shifted. It was no longer the heaviness of being invisible. It was the weight of something new. Possibility. I walked the streets of downtown Savannah like a stranger in my own city. For years, I had only left the house for groceries or doctor's appointments, always rushing, always with a list, always with someone else's needs in mind. But that day, I wandered without purpose, without guilt. I stopped into a small cafe I had passed for years but never entered. I ordered a cappuccino. I sat by the window and watched people live. And then I made a decision. I would no longer wait for someone else to invite me into life. I would go and find it myself. That night, I pulled out my laptop, the one I barely used except to pay bills or check Erin's emails about her graduate applications. I typed one word into the search bar, escape. Then I typed another, trains. What came up changed everything. There were overnight trains, scenic trains, luxury routes through mountains, deserts, along coastlines. One caught my eye, a route from Atlanta to Seattle. I stared at it for a long time, imagining what it might feel like to watch the world pass by from a train window, not from behind a sink full of dishes. I booked the ticket, first class. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. I didn't bring much, just a few clothes, a pair of earrings I hadn't worn in years, my favorite book, and a notebook I'd kept hidden in my dresser drawer, the one where I used to write poetry before the noise of life drowned out the voice in my head. I left a note on the kitchen table. Gone for a while. Don't wait up. The train departed just after sunset. As it pulled away from the station, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. Not fear, not regret, just the quiet buzz of what if. The train was beautiful, comfortable, the kind of travel experience I used to imagine while folding laundry or rubbing Lillian's feet. The dining car served real food. The linens were crisp. A steward offered me champagne, and for the first time in decades, I said yes to something just for me. As we passed through Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, I journaled. I watched forests blur into cities and cities fade into farmland. I thought about the last time I had traveled anywhere outside of the state and realized it had been my honeymoon. Frank had convinced me we couldn't afford a big trip back then. We'll go somewhere special for our 10th, he'd promised. We never did. By the time we reached Kansas City, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just escaping. I was becoming in Seattle. I stayed in a boutique hotel with velvet drapes and hand-carved furniture. The woman at the front desk greeted me with a smile that didn't feel forced. I walked the waterfront. I visited Pike Place Market. I watched a street performer play violin with his eyes closed and tears in his beard. I bought myself a journal bound in leather. I ate oysters on crushed ice and let the salty taste remind me I was still alive. I spent an afternoon sitting alone on a bench overlooking the Puget Sound, watching the ferries glide across the water. That's when I noticed a mother and daughter nearby, laughing over ice cream. The daughter said, "I love you, Mom." And I felt something tighten in my chest. Aaron hadn't said that in years. Neither had Caleb, not without following it with a request. But I didn't cry. I breathed. And in that breath, I knew I would never go back to who I had been. I wouldn't be the woman who waited for her family to remember her. I would be the woman who remembered herself. I booked another ticket, this time to Monterey, California. I wasn't sure what waited for me there, but for the first time, the not knowing didn't scare me. It thrilled me, and I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. When I returned to Savannah, it wasn't to the same house, and I wasn't the same woman who had packed a suitcase with trembling hands only a few weeks earlier. The air inside our home felt unfamiliar now, like the walls knew they'd been complicit in my erasure. Every curtain I had sewn, every photo I had hung, suddenly struck me as artifacts of a life I no longer belonged to. But I didn't cry. I walked through the house slowly, like a stranger evaluating a property she was ready to sell. There was no sadness, only detachment. And beneath it all, a growing heat, the quiet anticipation of justice. They came home 2 days earlier than expected. I heard the car before I saw them. The thud of doors closing, the light laughter, then the familiar sound of the front door unlocking, Caleb's voice shouting, "Mom, we've got a guest." Guest. The word echoed in my head. Charlene was the first to walk in, confident, relaxed, as if she had every right to be there. She wore one of those scarves I'd seen in her vacation photos, the kind that cost more than I'd spent on groceries in a week. Her eyes swept across the living room and landed on me, but there was no guilt, no apology, just a polite smile. "Margaret," she said lightly, as if we were old acquaintances bumping into each other at the grocery store. "Frank told me everything. I'm so sorry for the confusion. It was all just a big misunderstanding." I said nothing. Erin followed behind, dropped her bag at the foot of the stairs, and headed straight for the fridge. She frowned. "Why didn't you get juice? I texted you earlier." I stood still, watching them all. My family. So casual, so blind. Frank walked in last. He glanced at me, then away. His expression was unreadable. I could see the calculation in his eyes, trying to gauge what version of me he was facing. "Margaret," he began, "we didn't expect you back so soon." I looked at him, then turned to Caleb. "If you're planning to replace me," I said, voice quiet but steady, "you should have waited a few more days. It's not polite to push someone out of their own home while they still have the keys." Caleb's mouth opened, but no words came out. Charlene's smile tightened. "Margaret, this really is unnecessary. I'm only here to help clear up any misunderstandings. Frank and I, we're just friends. We happened to run into each other during the trip. That's all?" She walked toward the couch and made herself comfortable. I noticed she sat directly on the pillow I had embroidered by hand years ago, the one with our family initials stitched in gold thread. I walked over, picked it up from beneath her, and gently brushed it off. "I made this," I said, holding it in both hands. Every stitch, every corner. Funny, how something made with love ends up under someone who doesn't belong. Charlene shifted slightly. "Look, I don't want things to be awkward. We've known each other for years. If Frank had ever loved me like that, why would he have married you?" I met her eyes and gave a small smile. Some people eat steak in their youth and grow old with cravings for junk food. Others get so used to their routine that they forget what quality even tastes like. You tell me which he is. She blinked, caught off guard by the calm venom in my tone. Before she could respond, Frank stepped in. "That's enough," he said sharply. "Margaret, what's gotten into you?" I turned to face him, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw him clearly. Not the man I once loved, Not the boy who made promises under summer skies, but the aging, fragile, small man who had hidden behind me for decades while pretending to be the head of the house. "What's gotten into me?" I repeated. "No, Frank. The better question is, what did you let out of you? The lies, the arrogance, or the cowardice?" His jaw tightened. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being honest. You want cruel? Cruel is taking family vacations with another woman and blocking your wife from seeing the pictures. Cruel is letting our children think it's okay to treat me like a housekeeper they didn't hire. Cruel is pretending to be a faithful man while turning every holiday into an escape with Charlene." Aaron shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. Caleb finally said, "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. Aunt Charlene is just part of the family." I turned to him and my voice cracked, not from pain, but from the anger of a mother who had given everything. "Part of the family?" I said, stunned. "Then what am I, Caleb? What's my role in this family now? Do I need to clock in? Or should I just wait quietly until someone needs their laundry folded?" He flinched. I reached into the drawer by the bookshelf and pulled out a stack of photos. Charlene, smiling beside my children. Charlene, toasting wine with Frank. Charlene, standing where I used to stand. I threw them onto the coffee table. "Explain this," I said. "Explain how someone you supposedly ran into has been on every single one of your vacations for the past 3 years." The room fell into silence. No one moved. Charlene finally spoke, her voice icy now. "So, what if we travel together? It's not like we did anything improper. Frank deserves companionship. Do you even understand what that word means? Margaret?" I laughed, a short, sharp laugh that echoed in the silence. "Companionship," I repeated. "Yes, I understand. It's what I gave him every night when I bathed his mother. It's what I gave him when I stitched his shirts by hand during law school. It's what I gave him when I swallowed my dreams and built a life around his. That's companionship." Charlene crossed her arms. "And what did he get in return? A bitter, aging wife with nothing to offer but resentment?" I smiled again, slower this time. "I scored higher than Frank on the college entrance exam. I turned down Duke for him. You remember, don't you? Charlene? You had to take the test 3 times just to get into a state college. So let's not pretend I was never enough." Frank stepped forward, his voice raised. "So what? You chose to stay home. That was your decision. You could have done something with your life, but you didn't." I took a deep breath. My voice lowered, but every word landed like a blow. "Who paid for your tuition, Frank? Who kept our home running while you built your career? Who kept your mother alive for 16 years while you were too busy being important?" He didn't answer. "Don't you dare stand here and call me a failure. Everything you have, every inch of your success, was built on my back. And now, I'm done." I reached into my purse and pulled out the divorce papers, set them on the table. "Sign them." He stared at them, then at me. "You won't survive without me." "You've said that before," I replied. "And yet, here I am, still standing." Charlene stepped back, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "I don't want a war. Margaret." "Then leave," I said simply. "Leave this house. Leave my family. Leave me to rebuild what's left of my life without the rot you've spread." Frank snatched the papers and tore them in half. "I'll give you 15,000, he said, sneering. "Take it or leave it." I stared at him, calm as ever. "That's not how this works anymore, Frank. You don't get to name the price of my freedom." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I simply walked away, like a woman who had finally remembered her worth. And for the first time in decades, I heard the echo of my own footsteps. no longer following anyone else's path, but finally creating one of my own. I had always thought that peace came after closure, that the storm would settle once the truth had been spoken, once the divorce papers were signed and the betrayals laid bare. But what I learned in those weeks after walking out of that house was that peace is not something granted. It is not handed to you after a final argument or earned with a dramatic confrontation. Peace is something you claim, quietly, repeatedly, until it becomes your own. I left Savannah without fanfare. No farewell party, no one to wave goodbye. The home I had once poured my life into, every corner filled with my touch, every drawer packed with the unspoken sacrifices of motherhood and marriage, no longer felt like a home. It felt like a monument to the woman I used to be, and I had no desire to visit her grave. I took the train to Monterey, California. It wasn't part of any grand plan. It simply sounded soft, coastal, kind. I had seen it in a travel magazine once while waiting in a dentist's office. A photo of waves curling against the shore, the sky melting into lavender. I had torn the page out and kept it folded in my wallet for years, tucked behind credit cards and grocery receipts. I think, deep down, a part of me always knew I would go there. Eventually, when I arrived, I rented a small room in a senior living community that welcomed independent women. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe. There were flower boxes on the windowsills and a communal garden that smelled of rosemary and citrus. The other residents were mostly women in their 60s and 70s, widows, divorcees. Some had never married at all. I met Clara, who had spent 20 years teaching abroad. I met Ruth, who had run a bakery in Maine until arthritis took her hands, but not her heart. I met Evelyn, who wore red lipstick every day and said, "I'm not dead yet, so I'll keep living like I'm not." Their stories didn't make me feel small. They made me feel seen. For the first time in decades, I had no one to answer to, no schedule dictated by pills, school pickups, or someone else's agenda. I woke up when I wanted, ate when I was hungry. I started going for long walks along the coast, letting the sea air clear the places inside me where resentment used to live. One afternoon, I wandered into a local art center just a few blocks from my new home. There was a community weaving class in session, and a woman named Isabel, with silver curls and a raspy laugh, invited me in like I belonged there. She showed me how to stretch yarn across a loom, how to thread colors and patterns that told stories without words. My hands, so long used to scrubbing, stirring, folding, were finally doing something for beauty's sake alone. I cried quietly the first time I completed a full piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I began to spend more time creating, weaving, sewing again, but not out of necessity, for expression. I stitched small handbags with bold patterns and started selling them at the Saturday morning market. Tourists would stop and ask where I got the fabric, who designed the colors, and I would smile and say, "It just came to me." I was no longer invisible. I had become someone again, someone of her own making. Evenings were filled with soft music, tea, and the company of women who weren't afraid of age. We laughed over stories of past lovers, burned dinners, children who forgot to call. There was no competition, no need to prove ourselves, just presence, just being. Eventually, I signed up for a digital photography class at the local library. The instructor, a retired journalist named Tom, taught us how to frame ordinary moments: an open window, a tide rolling in, the way light hits a sidewalk at sunset. Through the lens of that camera, I began to see the world not as a backdrop to someone else's story, but as something alive, waiting for my eyes to claim it. I took trips, too, small ones. I visited Banff and stood before mountains that looked like gods asleep beneath the snow. I walked the red earth of Sedona and felt grounded in a way I never had before. In Santa Fe, I stayed in a small adobe house with a painted door and bought myself a turquoise ring from a woman who told me, "This stone is for women starting over." I wore that ring every day. I started a travel journal. Nothing fancy, just a cheap notebook where I scribbled thoughts, pasted ticket stubs, dried wildflowers between the pages. Eventually, I began posting small reflections online. I didn't think anyone would read them, but they did. Women from all over Minnesota, Oregon, even Ireland, began writing to me. You remind me of my mother. I left after 30 years, too. Thank you for saying what I never could. One day, while sipping coffee in a seaside cafe, I received a message from Erin. It was the first message in weeks that didn't ask for anything. It simply read, I saw your photo of the harbor. It's beautiful. You look happy. I'm glad. I stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't say she was sorry, but for the first time, it didn't feel necessary. Her words, however small, were a bridge, and I didn't feel the need to walk across it just yet, but I appreciated its existence. Frank tried to reach out once, a short, clipped voicemail. I hope you're doing well. I'm sure you've made your point by now. We should talk. There are some things I'd like back. I deleted it without listening twice. Let him want. Let him wonder. I had nothing left for him. Not because I hated him, but because I had spent too many years giving him parts of myself he never earned. In Monterey, I found myself in the quietest ways, in the way strangers smiled without expectation, in the way the ocean answered every thought with waves, in the way my own laughter began to sound like someone I recognized, someone from long ago. Some nights I still cried. That didn't go away completely. Grief, even when deserved, doesn't obey logic. It moves in and out like the tide. But now, I welcomed it like an old friend. Let it in. Let it pass. One night, at a community gathering, I met a woman named June. She was in her 70s, wore hand-painted earrings, and made the best cornbread I'd ever tasted. We sat on a bench watching the sky turn rose gold. She turned to me and said, You know, the most important thing in a woman's life isn't having a good husband. It's having a heart that no one can chain down. I didn't respond right away, but the words stayed with me, because in my first youth, I had built a life around love. In this second youth, I was learning to build a life around freedom, and it tasted like salt air and woven threads and laughter that didn't ask for permission. It felt like a new beginning, because that's what it was. The divorce didn't happen quietly. I didn't expect it to. When a woman like me, after decades of quiet service, finally speaks, the world around her scrambles, especially when the people closest to her have grown used to her silence, her willingness to disappear so that they can shine. Frank was livid when he realized I was serious. He laughed at first, then tried to bargain. When bargaining failed, he threatened. You'll ruin what little peace we have left, he said once during a tense call with his lawyer present. But what peace was he referring to? The performance of a perfect family? The illusion of loyalty that only existed in Christmas cards and Facebook photos? That was never peace. That was a polished prison. And I had already walked free. The legal proceedings dragged for over a year. Frank, as expected, did everything he could to delay the process. He leaned on his connections, tried to freeze accounts, tried to manipulate our children into siding with him. But I had kept records, every receipt, every text, every ignored call during his many so-called business trips. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Half of everything, the house, the accounts, the pensions, even the investments I never knew existed until the paperwork brought them to light. What Frank hadn't counted on was how much his pride depended on his image. When word got out in his professional circle that his wife had not only filed for divorce, but had publicly donated his prized book collection, his literary legacy, as he once called it, he unraveled. His colleagues stopped seeing him as the man of principles he had long pretended to be, And when Charlene finally realized that Frank without money and prestige was just a bitter, aging man with declining health, she left. No goodbye, no letter, just gone. Caleb distanced himself in the months that followed. He was always Frank's mirror, and when that mirror cracked, he didn't know where to place the blame. On me? On his father? On himself? Perhaps all three. Erin, on the other hand, slowly softened. Her texts grew longer. She asked questions about my life in Monterey, about the women I spent time with, about the crafts I was making. There was hesitancy in her tone, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to reach for me again. I didn't push her away, but I didn't pull her close either. Healing has its own pace, and sometimes distance is a necessary form of love. Frank's health declined rapidly after the court ruling. Without Charlene, without the illusion of control, he fell into depression. A mild stroke followed, and he was placed in a nursing home outside of Savannah. Erin called to tell me. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of uncertainty. "Mom," she said, "Dad had a stroke. It's not life-threatening, but they said he shouldn't be alone." There was a long pause. I didn't fill it. "I figured I should tell you," she added. "I'm not asking you to go. I just thought you'd want to know." I thanked her. And that was all. I didn't go see him. I didn't call. I didn't write. I had done enough. I had given him years of care when no one else would. I had held his mother's hand through her final breath while he stood in hotel lobbies with another woman. That chapter was closed, not with hate, but with finality. Some doors are meant to stay shut. You don't walk through a fire, survive it, then go back to feel the heat again. Instead, I stayed in Monterey. I kept weaving, kept sewing, kept walking the shoreline each morning as the mist curled around the rocks like a secret. I joined a writing group, not just to journal, but to finally write the stories that had lived inside me all these years. I wrote about small towns and women who disappeared. I wrote about a girl who won an essay contest but lost her voice. I wrote about a woman who loved her family so much she forgot she existed. And then I wrote about the woman who remembered. My blog slowly grew a readership. Women reached out to me, strangers who said they saw themselves in my words. Some had never left their husbands but dreamed of it. Others had walked away years before and still carried guilt like an heirloom. They thanked me for speaking, for not apologizing, for showing that it wasn't too late. One afternoon, while sitting at the cafe near the pier, Erin called. Her voice was gentler than I remembered, more grounded. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking a lot about everything." I listened quietly. "I was wrong," she continued. "About you, about what you went through. I didn't see it, or maybe I didn't want to." I let her words land. "I want to do better," she said. "If you ever feel like visiting, even for a little while, I'd love to have you." I smiled, watching the waves roll in. "I'm not saying no," I said softly, "but I'm not saying yes right now either. I have a few more places I'd like to see first." She laughed gently. "I figured you'd say that." And that was enough. For now, I continued exploring. I traveled to the Oregon coast, to a quiet town with art galleries and antique stores where no one knew my name. I hiked a trail in Yosemite with a woman I met in my writing group who carried poetry in her pockets. I visited a monastery retreat in New Mexico and spent 3 days in silence, listening to the voice that had once been drowned out by everyone else's needs. My heart no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a garden. And while not everything had bloomed yet, I had learned to tend to it with patience. One evening, as the sun began to set in Big Sur, I sat on a bench overlooking the cliffs. The sky melted into hues of coral and blue, and the sea below whispered like an old friend. I sipped from a thermos of warm tea and pulled out my notebook. I wrote a single sentence. I chose me, And that changed everything. Because it had. I was not the same woman who stood on that porch and watched her family drive away. I was not the same woman who stayed behind because she thought that love meant silence. I was not the same woman who measured her worth in clean floors and folded laundry. I was Margaret Whitman, a mother, yes, a former wife, yes, but also a writer, a traveler, a weaver of stories and threads, a woman who had been reduced to a shadow and had found her way back to the light. And the most beautiful part, I hadn't just survived. I had begun, and this beginning was entirely mine. When we look at the arc of Margaret Whitman's life, what we see is not just the story of one woman, but the quiet tragedy that lives inside so many others. Women who gave everything to everyone else and were left with nothing for themselves. It's a story that begins in youth, where love feels like purpose and sacrifice seems noble. Margaret, bright and ambitious, with a full-ride scholarship to Duke University, made a choice. She followed Frank, a man she believed in, and gave up her dream to support his. That single decision, made out of devotion, became the seed of a lifetime spent putting herself last. And for decades, that seemed acceptable. After all, wasn't she being a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter-in-law? But the problem with being good for too long, too quietly, too obediently, is that people stop seeing you as a person. They start seeing you as a role, a utility. Margaret became the caretaker, the homemaker, the background character in a life she had once dreamed would be hers to lead. While Frank built his career and reputation, she built a home. While her children chased their own futures, she stayed behind, scrubbing floors and feeding pills to a mother-in-law who never once said thank you. Her family thrived, but they never looked back to ask if she had. The turning point came in silence, as turning points often do, not in the loud betrayal of a slammed door or a shouted insult, but in the cold dismissal of being told there was no room in the car. That one moment crystallized 1,000 other smaller moments, a holiday missed, a compliment withheld, a request ignored, and in that heartbreak, Margaret saw the truth. She had not been included in the lives she had built. She had been tolerated, forgotten, taken for granted. From there, her transformation began, not in rage, but in clarity. The woman who had folded clothes with aching hands began folding truth into action. She gave away Frank's beloved books, not out of spite, but to reclaim her space in a world he had pushed her out of. She boarded a train not just to travel, but to prove that her life could still expand, even after 60. In Monterey, she did not simply rest, she rebuilt. Through weaving, writing, walking by the ocean, and meeting other women who had been similarly reduced, she constructed a new life brick by brick, thread by thread. What makes Margaret's story remarkable isn't the betrayal she endured, it's the decision she made afterward. She chose herself, and that choice, repeated every morning she woke up without regret, became the foundation of her second youth. It was not defined by luxury or grandeur. It was defined by agency, by self-trust, by peace. Even in the aftermath, the courtrooms, the painful conversations with her children, the knowledge that Frank's downfall was partly her doing, she remained grounded. Not bitter, just done carrying burdens that weren't hers, done trying to make others comfortable while she suffered in silence. Her story didn't end in revenge, it ended in reflection. She didn't need anyone else's validation to know she was worth something. And in that truth, she found a joy she had been denied for too long. The lessons from Margaret's journey are many, but one stands above all. Do not wait for others to give you permission to live. Life will pass while you're waiting to be appreciated, acknowledged, loved the way you deserve. You must choose to value yourself even when others don't, especially when others don't. For the audience watching this, maybe you see pieces of yourself in Margaret. Maybe you've given your life to a marriage, a family, a job, or a role that once filled you with meaning, but somewhere along the way, you disappeared. Maybe you've told yourself, it's too late, or this is just how things are now. But the truth is, it's never too late to come back to yourself, to travel, to create, to reclaim your space in the world. Whether you're 45 or 75, the life you dream of doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be yours. Margaret's story reminds us that freedom often comes wrapped in difficult decisions. Leaving is hard, standing up is hard, facing the ones you love and telling them the truth is terrifying. But what's harder still is living a life that's not your own, shrinking yourself every day so that others can stretch comfortably. So let's take a moment for reflection. If you were in Margaret's shoes after decades of sacrifice, after being left behind by your family, what would you have done? Would you A, stay and continue hoping things will change? B, walk away and reclaim your independence? Comment your answer below with either A or B, and tell us why you chose that path. We want to hear your thoughts. Your perspective might resonate deeply with someone else who is struggling in silence. Let's build a space where stories like Margaret's aren't just heard, but honored. And now, as we continue building this channel and sharing real, powerful stories like this one, we'd love your support. If this video moved you, inspired you, or made you feel seen, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more content that speaks to the soul, especially for those in seasons of transition, healing, or rediscovery. So, what did Margaret's story mean to you? How did it challenge you? How did it comfort you? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. You never know who you might inspire just by sharing your truth. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear what happens in the next story, because life, after all, keeps surprising us, especially when we finally decide to live it on our own terms.